Very excited about today's topic. It's actually a topic that's very dear to the heart because it is a problem I've spent majority of my time, all of my time actually solving for as a product manager here at Experian. My name is Lee Mao. I manage our fraud solutions from a commercial perspective that's really aimed to help our clients in the business world, like the likes of banks, fintechs, or manufacturing, evaluate other businesses to identify potential fraudulent intent during the application process, really before they enter your portfolio. I think that's a really critical piece to understand because after the fact detection is ultimately too late once you get into your portfolio, because then you start taking on some losses. But really, enough about me. We are in a sip and solve today, so I really do appreciate everyone's time to spend 15 minutes with me to kind of learn about this topic, learn about fraud, and how potentially you could help improve your account opening process to help identify more fraudsters. I'm currently sipping on an Americano. No sugar, no cream, just no frills at all, just pure Java here. But let's get into the topic. Let's dive in, right? So combating digital fraud attacks. A lot of times before I like to get right into the solution, I think it's really critical, really important to understand the attackers and where they're coming from, and really the magnitude of that problem, right? Because what we're seeing here today is that attackers really have a tremendous amount of data, and data is really gold because they have a ton of it. We need to essentially assume in today's day and age that everyone's information has been compromised or is compromised, and fraudsters are essentially becoming data aggregators, similar to how Experian is naturally been a data aggregator. They're stealing email addresses from one source, identity elements from a different source, and leveraging technologies like device cloning, home porting, and SIM cloning to attack vulnerable systems. And then compound that problem, right, with a tidbit that the fact is business information a lot of time is publicly available information as well. And the picture I'm trying to paint is that data is readily available for fraudsters to use, and it's at their fingertips. There's also ecosystems to allow fraudsters to purchase and sell stolen data in the black market, like the dark web. Yes, that's right. There are services that aggregate data on behalf of other paying fraudsters. I think it's always very interesting to see in the underground how the fraudsters are transacting, because they don't use credit cards or other monetary things that we come to used to, right? They use digital currencies such as Bitcoin or the very popular methods of transacting using airline miles and points. But how are they accessing this data? Really a number of different ways. I'm sure you're all familiar with some of the techniques today, really around data breaches, phishing attempts, purchasing information in the black market ecosystem that I've mentioned, and also at the front line, setting up sophisticated fraud corporations to really steal that identity. And as I mentioned for businesses, business identity, there's a lot of information already available online. So with that being said, let's go over some of the statistics I'm showing here on the slide. So on the left here, you're going to see Jovelin's estimate that about 14.4 million identity theft victims in the U.S. since 2018. Now, that's down from the 16 million in 2017, and really what they're saying is the attributed decrease is due to the reduced payment fraud, as the EVV chip has really reduced counterfeit payment cards. Essentially, the fraud is shifting more towards product where defenses are strong and the payoffs are much larger. So right on that, you're going to see the different figures of fraud losses during the two specific stages of customer lifestyle, where we're experiencing here is very actively looking to help clients solve and serve. So we see there's about $4 billion in losses due to account takeover fraud. Below that, you have Jovelin's estimate of $3.4 billion in new account losses. It is actually up about $400 million from 2017. As I said, the incidents are coming down, but the dollars and losses are increasing. So at the bottom of this slide, you're going to see two statistics from Experian's Global Fraud Identity Study. This year's study included about 10,000 consumer participants, about 1,000 businesses in 21 countries around the globe. So with the two bottom statistics here is actually the outcome of that survey. So 70% of the participants in that survey said that they're willing to provide more information to a business if they see a benefit in terms of security or convenience. And then to the right of that, you have 74% from that same survey are more confident that biometrics will protect them more than their username and password. I think these two data points are very important because it's traditionally against what I think historically our different industries have viewed on introducing more friction to the application process or having more stringent verification, because they view it as a bad thing in terms of providing that convenience or having that great customer experience. That's always essentially be a big no-no. But I think what the survey essentially is telling us that the study is that security is very important and top of mind for consumers like ourselves. And I think we're really more willing to engage with the application or with the business by providing data and using biometrics to essentially feel more secure. Here, what I'm showing on this slide is essentially one approach to combating fraud that I've seen common. This approach should be utilized as the first layer of defense in a fraud strategy. I think very important still as part of your overall fraud strategy, but you may encounter some challenges with fighting more sophisticated fraudsters. So with this approach, you're really looking at the business name on application and ensuring that that matches the business name from your trusted source that you look to today. Can we confirm the same address that belongs to this business with that same trusted source? Similarly, I view it the same way as a phone number and tax ID as well, how well that matches against that source, and essentially the lack of information or not matching information should be indicators or potential indicators of fraudulent intent, or how well essentially you're able to verify. There's an additional level of sophistication you can add to that to try and identify if there's multiple or more than one business sharing the same phone number, address, or even the tax IDs. Because you look at it, there should be essentially a one-to-one correlation with one business at that address or at that phone number. So any times where you have things or items that tell you data that tells you differently, that should then lead you to believe that, hey, there may be something interesting or fishy going on to allow you then to further investigate. Now, this approach I just described is a very good step in the right direction, because ultimately, just previously, the previous approach looking at the activity, the very traditional approach to stopping fraud was just looking at the transaction. Hey, say, does that transaction look good to me? Does that value belong to this customer? Does that correlate? I think now we have a better understanding. If you start looking at behind who's the individual or the business is on the other end of the transaction, you're going to have a better probability or better statistic probability to essentially fight against fraud. So when we say to recognize the business and person, that really sets a better precedent for you to identify and prevent fraud. So for quite some time, there's always been this idea around the Bureau, and that's where Experian has been for many years. We have addresses, name, that's that blue bubble that you see there, names, addresses, social security numbers, date of birth, and many information around the business, like tax IDs, I mentioned, Secretary of State filing, that provides more insight behind the business from a data perspective. As I mentioned, great and essential, but probably today's day and age, maybe it's not enough. And there's a lot of new data sources out there that's all part of this digital transformation, essentially, that we're all leaving behind, whether it's our social media footprint or the things like your actional history from a shopping cart or biometrics data. There's also now email history that we can start to look at to help us essentially formulate this new commercial ID profile. Now, our thought and philosophy here is that we can start looking at all this new data, merge it together and combine it with some of the traditional data, and then layering or write intelligence or analytics on top of it. You start to form more of a single picture of identity around this commercial or consumer identity. Now, separately, each of these data, right, could be helpful, but we really believe with the right intelligence, you'll be able to automate a lot of your account opening process and ultimately provide a better understanding of that business in a single view. So our intent is that we want to be able to pull this all together to build a clear picture of the identity, because ultimately I think identity isn't clear-cut. It's really a combination of multiple different attributes and its relationship and linkages between all of these attributes. And that's why we feel that building the right intelligent layer, part of your decisioning process, over a wide variety of hundreds of attributes, and that's when you start to be able to pull things together and say, hey, if there's an application coming through on the device emulator and the device is configured in some type of foreign language, in the way that the velocity of activity over time has increased, and the person is doing it actually through a copy-paste, and the email associated has only been around for 6 hours, how they ultimately click through, do they copy-paste a lot, because all of that information combined together could be an indication of fraud. So there's a lot being said. There are a lot of new data for you to look at. So if you wanted to start, right, from where I just mentioned previously with the kind of the verification identity, if you want to start looking at additional data, where do you want to start enhancing your fraud strategy? Where do you begin, right? So what I recommend, you start evaluating new data sources beyond just name and address, as I mentioned, as a start to building a clear picture of that business identity. We've looked at hundreds, if not thousands, of different data sets here and attributes, and we found some very interesting ones and very predictive ones along the way. I'm happy to kind of talk to you about a few of them for you to have a starting point, essentially. I think the business-consumer linkage is very, very interesting data point to start to look at some more. We've had the philosophy around, in the new digital world, a representative for a business, someone who is acting as a proxy for a business, right? It's still a person that may be logging into a corporate environment from their device or the devices. So there's this idea then we start to blur the lines between how we recognize the consumer and how we recognize a business is becoming more prevalent, especially in the U.S. domestic market where there's not an official public registry, right, where a person must disclose itself as a business owner. So we spend a lot of time here at Experian refining our ability to accurately identify persons associated to a business. Really, how we do that is we look at multiple different data points to help us make that assessment. So information we can learn from a phone, from a website, and an email address even, all could potentially provide full records of a name, last name, title, work history, or even an address, a physical address belonging to those things that I previously mentioned. A phone number could tell us who owns and activated that phone, whether it's owned by a business or activated by a specific business or even an individual. Even the absence of that information, as I mentioned, could be a potential indication of fraud. As I mentioned, email addresses now today could even point out if that person, there's a specific name tied to that email address, and when we've seen that email address across multiple different ecosystems. Has it always been used by this name and address with that email address as well? Another one that we found and spent a lot of time reviewing is social media. Now, we've already found that social media could be potential indicators for credit risk, but also for fraud risk as well. So things like, does this business even have a social media presence? So if you think about a business and not having, in today's age, a social media presence, even if there are things like an auto repair retail shop, flower shop, candy store, which we should more than likely expect them to have some type of online social media presence. So the lack thereof could be a potential indicator of fraud. So how many reviews does this flower shop have? Have this volume of reviews increase or decrease over time to indicate that there's been a sales decline or growth? All those things should be considered as part of your fraud strategy potentially. Is this location still open? When do they open? Or are they actually permanently closed? Another indicator that we've seen is the type of service this business offer on the application. If they filled out that they have our candy shop, the same information should be verified by other sources, right? So we're also looking at things like the website, a domain to see where it's first created, the person or the business who actually managed the website. Are there any registered owners? Does this website have any site traffic? Right, because a legitimate business with a website should have validated traffic, and traffic should base within that region that the business is established. If they're getting a website that's based in the U.S., traffic from Russia, for example, that should be a leading indicator of potential fraud, right? I think the telco information around the device is very important as well. We have a lot of intelligence now around when the phone is, whether the phone is ported, if the account has been activated for less than 30 days, is it a contract or prepaid phone, who's the primary account holder, right? All that information could be gleaned off of the device and the phone itself. So all the different data points I mentioned should be considered compared against the application information or how your applicant is identifying themselves. The more you're able to verify, corroborate, or link together, the stronger your trust should be that this is a legitimate business applicant. At some point, all the data sources I've mentioned is probably something that you could apply manually and review in a non-automated environment. But at some point, that may longer be scalable, or you require more sophistication. That's where I believe that truly the next phase begins, where you start bringing more analytics on top of it. So you start bringing the data together, the disparate data that get in an automated way. Because our intention is that you start bringing all this information together to help you build a better identity. As I mentioned, the identity should be a combination of multiple different attributes into relationships between all of these different attributes, right? The intent here is for you to ultimately catch fraud faster with fewer resources, future-proof your account opening policies, reducing your exposure to fraud, ultimately improving your overall operational efficiencies, and ultimately better effectively implement your policy and procedures in place. I know we're running out of time, but really do appreciate you guys taking a quick break with me to kind of learn about this topic and potentially how you can solve the problem you're seeing today. If you have further questions about combating digital fraud, you can always reach out to your representative here at Experian or visit our website to learn more. There's also more up-and-coming SIP and solves as well. So really appreciate everyone, and thank you for your time.